Hello all and welcome to this tutorial. This tutorial is on Microsoft Excel, and today we're going to be looking at the relative and absolute referencing in Microsoft Excel. As most of you know, this is very important for implementing Microsoft Excel functions. And for some who have issues implementing Microsoft Excel functions, almost often the related problem is because they are not fixing the relative or absolute referencing in the way it should be. But after this tutorial, I can assure you that you will be used to the different referencing used in Microsoft Excel, and then you will be able to implement them correctly. So the first one we'll be looking at is the relative referencing. Now, what do we mean by this relative referencing? We will understand it more when we demonstrate it by the use of formulas. Now, I have numbers here. I have numbers 3, 3, 3, 3 in all of these cells across columns here. And then we have different numbers here. So what I want to do is just to put in a formula here. And the formula is going to be equal to 3 multiplied by 4. So 3 multiplied by 4, that's what we get. And in the cell just below this formula, I have used the formula text to get the formula that's operating in here. So if you look at the name box here, you see it's the same with what is here. I just want us to have it visible so that we can see what it is. So what's really happening here, we have equal to sign, and we're saying that B6 is multiplying B7. Now B is the column identity or the column reference, and then 6 and 7 are rows. They are rows here. So I haven't entered this formula here. All I have to do is copy it down to my right hand side. So what I do is just select the range in which select the cell with the formula, and then select up to the range where I want to apply it, and I'm just going to hit Control arrow, that is copy to the right. And so we have the formulas copied down here. So the question is, how is it that Excel knows what to do in this cell, and in this other cell? It is because of relative referencing. The default referencing that comes with Microsoft Excel is the relative referencing. And what do we mean by this? What we mean is that if we implement a formula in a particular cell and we copy it into other cells, what it does is that it tries to replicate the relationship in the cell we had initially entered a formula. So I'm going to click on F2 here so that we'll see what we're talking about. So while we're in this cell, I press my F2 button, and I want you to see here that what it's actually doing, it is taking B6, which is having a blue rectangle, and then B7, which is having a red rectangle here. Depending on your screen, these are the colors that appear in my screen. Okay, so when we move to any of the other cells that we had made a copy of our initial formula, we see that it does just the same thing. What it does is that it does the C6 multiplied by C7 here. And so we get our answers correctly here. So that's what it has done here. And so because of relative referencing, we're able to just copy this formula and into all others, and our answers are correct. So you will quickly realize that this setting is a horizontal table. And so when we have a horizontal table and we are implementing relative referencing, rows are relative. That means we do not need a dollar sign in referencing the rows. We also do not need a dollar sign referencing the columns when we have a table like this, and a table in which we have whatever we're using to multiply in each of the cells in those columns. So we try to come up with a definition for relative referencing, and we say that for relative referencing, it is defined as a change in referenced cells due to a change in formula location. So this is a formula location, and when we copy it down here, it changes to this. And because we have copied it to another cell, another location here, then the cells that are referenced will change. They will definitely change. We'll see the same thing when we look at relative referencing, but this time in a vertical table. So it's the same table, but what we've just done here is to transpose this table, and that's why we have this one here. So we just enter the formula equal to this cell multiplied by these are the cell. We hit our enter button, and so you see that unlike the previous one where we find that the rows were fixed because we're just dealing with these two rows, but the columns were changing. But in this one, it's a different thing. So I'm going to copy down. And when we copy down, you can see that the columns are fixed here. So this column and this column, they are the only columns we're dealing with. But the rows are changing: 12, 13, 14, and 15. The rows are changing. However, because we are using relative referencing here, because what we use in multiply in each of these formulas are in the same row and in a cell in that row, it's comfortable for us to do this, and we get our answers correctly. So in this case, it is similar to what we have here, except that it's a vertical table, and our definition of relative referencing still holds. But let's see some changes. So when we have absolute referencing, we want to look at absolute referencing this time for columns here. So you see that my number 3 is no longer in each of these cells corresponding to the numbers that we want to multiply 3 with. So it's just in this column, and in just one cell. So what we do, just to explain absolute referencing, we say equal to, and we have this multiplied by the number below, which is 4. So we hit and we get the correct answer. So because we got the correct answer, Excel makes it possible for us to copy formulas from one cell to the other. So I'm going to use my mouse this time so that you can see it. So I've copied it here, but you can see that I'm not getting my desired answers here. then the question is, what is happening? Well, what is happening is that Excel is still implementing relative referencing here. So if we come to this cell, hit our F2, we see it's 8 multiplied by 0. In empty cells, the default value there is 0. 8 multiplied by 0. So we get 0. It looks correct. You get it. But that's not what we want. We actually want 8 to multiply 3 here. So what do? So we just look here, because the problem must be caused by whatever is changing. So we see that we have both rows here, which is 20 and 21. It is constant here. So the problem is not in the rows. The problem is in the columns, because we see column B, column C, column D, and column E, all of that changing. So what this implies is that we should tell Excel that don't leave this column when you use the value in this cell to multiply all of the numbers. So we go back to our initial formula, and here you can see that we need to work on the number 3, which is in the blue rectangle. So in the blue rectangle, we see that B is the column reference or column identity here, and 20 is the row. So we don't have any business doing anything with the row, so it's the column. So to make the column absolute, we put a dollar sign, we type a dollar sign before the column identity. It is always before the column identity, never after the column identity. You can put a dollar sign before a column identity. You can put a dollar sign before a row identity. A lot of people make that mistake, and then you find them putting a dollar sign after, especially the row identity. You're going to get errors with that. So it's always before whatever identity you want to make absolute. So in this case, we're making the column absolute. So we're going to put in the dollar sign. We just type a dollar sign before that that identity. For some of us who have computers that are enabled to do that, your F4 toggles through the different kinds of absolute references that you might need. Okay, so if I hit my F4, you can see that there's a dollar sign before the B, which is the column identity, and a dollar sign before the row identity. But I don't want a dollar sign before the row identity, so I'm going to hit my F4 again. So when I hit my F4, I have a dollar sign before the row identity here. That's not what I want. I want it before the column identity and only for the column identity. So I'm going to hit my F4 again. So you can see it toggles through. It toggles through all the kinds of referencing, absolute referencing that you might need to implement. So this is what I want. So I'm going to hit my enter button, and I'm going to copy my formulas down here, and you see that I get my desired answers. So if you take any of these cells now and hit your F2, you can see it's doing exactly what we want. So we've told it that even if I copy to the right hand side or to the left hand side, if that's going to be the case in whatever formulas you are implementing, then what we should do is to make the column absolute, or make the column fixed. And so that's what I have just summarized here. We fix changing column identities, and then the column is absolute. There's a dollar sign before the column identity. Role here is relative because the role does not affect the values that are returned here. The rows are same, so no need to do that. So when we look at the definition for absolute, how can we define that? We can say that for that of absolute referencing, absolute reference defines a fixed referenced column, though changes in formula location. So it's a fixed reference column, although there are changes in the formula location. So that's for that. We can also have that for the row, like you can see here. So here we have the transpose of this. We have the transpose of this. And so it's the same thing with this, except in this case, we will be making a row absolute because we'll be copying through rows, across rows here. Here we copied across columns, but here it's going to be across rows. So we can say that this multiplied by this, and that's what we get. We get the answer here. And then we copy it down, we don't get the answer here. So what's the problem? Whatever is changing here is the problem here. So we see that the columns are fixed, BC and BC. So BC can be, then the rows are changing. So we identify which row should we make absolute. So let's click on one of those where we don't get what we want, and then that's it. So you can see this is the guy. This is this is the error here. So we go back to our initial formula, look for the blue rectangle, and then make the row absolute. So F4, we hit the F4 button. 1, that's not what we want. 2, that's what we want. So we hit enter, and we can copy down this. So it's going to be Control D, which will copy it down, so we get our correct answers. Formulas, definitions rather, are the same, except for this. We're talking about a fixed reference row, though change in formula location. So our formula locations are changing, but we need to make a row fixed. So here 27 is made fixed here, and that's why we got our correct answers. So there are times where we need to make both column and row absolute. So that's what we have here. So the same problem, but we have introduced another row in there, then that's this other row. So let's implement it. So we hit equal to 3 multiplied by 2 here, and we hit our enter button. We get 6. That's correct. So when we copy it down, we see that we don't get our answers. So we quickly remember what we did here, that there should be a column that should be fixed. How do we know? Then when we go to this formula and we hit our F2, or just click on the formula on the formula bar, the formula here, and so we see that this is the problem. So we need to fix the column here. So we go to our initial formula, and then here the blue, and then the column F4 1 2 3. So it gives us a $sign before the column identity, and that should work. So we're going to copy it down, Control arrow, and then we get it correctly. So now that we've got it correctly, so we want to copy it down. But when we copy it down, you can see that this is correct, but look at what's happening here. It's 8 multiplied by 2. We want 8 to multiply 3. So we need to keep the row fixed. So we're going to our initial formula here again. still this, and we now see that not only the column should be absolute or fixed, but the row. So I'm going to hit my F4 until I get both of them referenced absolute. And so I hit my F4 and then I get what I want, both of them absolute. So hit your enter. So I'm going to copy it to the right hand side, Control arrow and Control D, and then I get my correct answers. And so you can see here that what we did was to fix the row and column identity to make them absolute, and that's bringing in a dollar sign. In the formula we have to introduce dollar signs, and also we see that in this case none of them is relative, both of them are absolute. And in definition, when we talk about absolute reference, it's a fixed reference cell though changes in formula location. So we have a cell fixed with reference to fixed, although we have changing locations across rows and across columns. So you want to learn this very, very well because it's very important. When you implement formulas like the H lookup, the VLOOKUP, the sum if or sum ifs, index, match functions, you implement them. Almost often, you need to determine what should be made absolute and what could be left to be relative. In other tutorials, you would see how this is implemented so that we get our desired answers. So I hope this tutorial helped you to understand relative and absolute referencing. You can always watch it again in order for you to understand it. It's very important in implementing functions and formulas in Excel. So you need to get a good grip of it. So it is my hope that this helps you to grasp the knowledge of relative and absolute referencing. If you've liked this video, please you make a comment, and you also would want to subscribe so that you can get tutorials of this sort to help you to be very, very good with using a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. So it's good to have you watch my video. I appreciate it very well. If you like it, please like it below, and I'll see you in another video. Thank you very much.